Once upon a time, there existed a kingdom named France. With its people existing relatively peacefully among one another for years, the kingdom had come to a point of great tension in the mid to late 1500s during the Protestant Reformation. Following the death of King Henry II in 1559, Queen Catherine de' Medici served as regent for her son Charles IX, who took the throne in 1560, second after his father, following the one-year reign of his brother Francis II. Medici was a moderate Catholic and took power at a time when Protestant and Catholic forces were reaching the peaks of their militancy. Her failure to please the Catholic majority politically resulted in the formation of the ultra-Catholic faction by the noble Guise family, who received support from both Paris and the Catholic Church and possessed a great personal fortune. Huguenots, the prominent Protestant group in France derived from Calvinists, made up 7% of the population but 50% of the nobility. Additionally, the House of Bourbon, the house next in line to the throne, were Huguenot, being led by Antoine de Navarre, who ruled over the southern kingdom of Navarre. The Huguenots, despite being a minority, ultimately had the resources to organize and pose a significant threat to the ultra-Catholics. The persecution of Huguenots by Catholics created a potential for Huguenots to go to war, and de' Medici attempted to mediate the two sides' relations to prevent this. Her hopes, however, would be crushed in early 1562 when Francis, the Duke of Guise, passed through the town of Vassy. It's reported the massacre of Vassy took place after the Duke found a Huguenot church service underway within a barn, and after being provoked, had the barn sacked and burned down. At least 63 Huguenots were killed and 100 more were wounded. In response, several Huguenot leaders organized troops and began attacks on Catholic towns and provinces. This sparked the first war in what we now know as the French Wars of Religion, or the 8 Wars of Religion. This first war led to the death of both Antoine de Navarre and Francis, Duke of Guise. Their thrones were inherited by their sons Henry of Navarre and Henry, Duke of Guise, respectively. This war ended with a peace treaty, the Edict of Ambrose, being signed by Catherine de' Medici in 1563. The Second War took place from 1567 to 1568, after Charles IX was freed from Catherine de' Medici's regency. Occurring due to increased tension over Charles IX's Catholic support, the war ended with the Peace of Longjumeau in 1568. The Third War began in the latter half of the same year and ended in 1570. This war saw both the Huguenots and the Ultra-Catholics receive support abroad, with Spain supporting the Ultra-Catholics in the form of troops, and England and Germany supporting the Huguenots in the form of money and resources. Additionally, this war saw Henry of Navarre begin his military career, taking the leading position within the Huguenot faction from 1569 onwards. The war ended with the Peace of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which, like the peace treaties before it, mostly rang hollow. In the 2 years following, relations seemed no better, with Huguenots still being massacred in the streets routinely. However, by 1572, hope for permanent peace would emerge. Henry of Navarre had been arranged to marry Charles IX's sister, Margaret of France. This marriage linking the Bourbon and Valois lines would surely bring peace between the Catholics and Huguenots flooded Paris in the thousands to be present for this great occasion. However, peace was not to come. Prior to the wedding, the Guise family had persuaded Charles IX that this large congregation of heathens in Paris, his capital city, posed a great threat to him and that he should deal with it accordingly. As such, on August 24th, the day began with the public murder and mutilation of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, a Huguenot leader, which further erupted into a 3-day wave of violence in Paris. Over this 3-day span, mobs of Catholics brutally murdered and, in some cases, looted the bodies of over 3,000 Huguenots who gathered in Paris for the wedding. This became known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. After being captured by a Catholic mob, Henry of Navarre converted to Catholicism to avoid being executed. However, after escaping Paris in 1576, he reconverted to Calvinism. The massacre galvanized other European powers and led to Huguenots concentrating into a smaller number of Huguenot-majority provinces in the south. The next 4 major wars took place from 1572 to 1580. The Fourth War began in 1572 due to Catholic siege of Huguenot towns, but was resolved by 1573. Henry III took the throne during the beginning of the Fifth War in 1574 after Charles IX's death due to pneumonia. Due to the weak strategic positions he inherited from his brother, he was forced to sign the Edict of Beaulieu in 1576 by Huguenot forces, which granted concessions to Huguenots the Catholics viewed as overly generous. Henry, Duke of Guise, began the Sixth War later the same year by forming the Catholic Holy League, which formally placed the House of Guise and the Ultra-Catholics at odds with King Henry III, who they viewed as being a less faithful king than the Duke of Guise would be. The Duke and the League pressured Henry III to revoke the Edict of Beaulieu. and when he did in 1577, the Sixth War came to an end. The Seventh War, lasting from 1579 to 1580, was minor in nature and resulted in a peace treaty which lasted until 1584, when Henry of Navarre became next in line to the throne. Henry III, in response to pressure from the Spanish and the Holy League, passed edicts revoking Henry of Navarre's right to the throne and persecuting Protestantism. Over the next 4 years, the Duke and the Holy League would continuously pressure Henry III to take direct action against the Huguenots. Tensions between the ultra-Catholics and Henry III would come to a head in 1588, when Henry fled Paris after a small uprising supporting the Duke of Guise took place. Following this, the Catholic Holy League would take power in Paris, and Henry, Duke of Guise, would effectively take Henry III's place. Any pretense of a diplomatic solution to this issue vanished 7 months later, when Henry III had Henry, Duke of Guise, assassinated in the Château de Blois. Following this, Henry III would ally himself with Henry of Navarre and go to war with the Catholic Holy League, with this conflict representing the eighth and final religious war, the War of the Three Henrys. In 1589, Henry III would die after being stabbed by a Dominican monk, but named Henry of Navarre his successor. Henry of Navarre was thereafter known as Henry IV, and from 1589 to 1593 he participated in several major battles against the Holy League. But what ultimately led to peace was his conversion to Catholicism in 1594. Pope Clement VIII officially pardoned Henry of his excommunication, and the general sentiment among French Catholics was one of forgiveness towards Henry and support for the crown. Within Paris, support for the Catholic Holy League had virtually vanished. However, some hostile Spanish-backed member states still existed. To deal with this, Henry IV declared war on Spain in 1595, and launched offensives on these hostile states until his ultimate victory in 1597. In 1598, the Edict of Nantes and the Peace of Vervins were issued. The Edict of Nantes granted equal rights to Huguenots, including freedom to hold any occupation and general freedom from persecution, while also establishing Catholicism as the official state religion. With the passing of this edict, the French wars of religion effectively came to an end. The Peace of Vervins was signed by Henry IV and King Philip II of Spain, and, as a result of its signing, all Spanish forces left France and could no longer provide the Catholic Holy League any support. Thus, with the nation unified under a common leader once more, and with foreign powers no longer stimulating the country's civil war, peace was finally restored, and Catholics and Protestants would live in religious harmony within France from there on after, or so they thought. During these 36 years of conflict, an estimated 2 to 4 million people lost their lives, either due to combat or to the pestilence and famine which accompanied it. This series of conflicts represents one of the most deadly religious wars in European history, only being surpassed by the 30 Years' War. The lineage of the French nobility, as well as the nation's entire political landscape, was irrevocably changed, with the last Valois king reigning during this period. Henry IV's son and successor, Louis XIII, attempted to reintroduce Catholicism into Navarre and was, in total, responsible for 2 more wars with the Huguenots, which ultimately resulted in Louis XIII removing many of the protections offered to Huguenots from the Edict of Nantes. Many Huguenots would begin to flee France during and after Louis XIII's reign, relocating to England, the Dutch Republic, Switzerland, and non-French American colonies, among other areas. Louis XIV, who took power immediately following Louis XIII, would revoke the Edict of Nantes in 1685 and make Protestantism entirely illegal within France through the Edict of Fontainebleau. This act would stay in effect for over a century.